Think the scariest part of seeing a UFO is the spaceship? It's not. It's the men in black suits who show up at your house the next day and already know your name. Welcome to The Purple Files. If you enjoy our videos, please consider subscribing to the channel. Let's get right into it. We begin with the case that is widely considered to be ground zero for the entire Men in Black phenomenon. It is a story so foundational that it happened before the term flying saucer was even coined and before the world had UFO fever. It is a dark, complex, and tragic tale that set the template for every MIB encounter that would follow. A strange sighting, the appearance of a sinister man in black, and a warning to remain. This is the story of the Maury Island incident. The date was June 21st, 1947. A man named Harold Dahl was working as a harbour patrolman, scavenging for stray logs in his boat on the Puget Sound, just off Maury Island in Washington state. He was not alone. With him were his 15-year-old son, 2 other crewmen, and his family dog. On that clear summer day, Dahl and his crew looked up and saw something that defied all explanation. Hovering about 2,000 feet above their boat were 6 large, metallic, donut-shaped objects. 5 of these craft were circling a 6th, central one, which appeared to be damaged and struggling to stay airborne. Suddenly, the central craft began to spew a strange substance. Thousands of fragments of metal rained down from the sky. Some of it was a lightweight, white-colored metal, while other pieces were a dark, heavy, slag-like material. The debris pummeled their boat, damaging the wheelhouse and breaking the windshield. The falling slag was intensely hot. It burned the arm of Dahl's son and, tragically, struck and killed their dog. As quickly as they had appeared, the objects silently sped away. The next morning, the true horror of the incident began. Dahl was approached by a man dressed in a pristine black suit, driving a brand new black 1947 Buick sedan. The man invited Dahl to a local diner for breakfast. Once there, the man in black recounted the entire previous day's events to Dahl in meticulous, impossible detail. Details Dahl had not yet told anyone. The man knew the exact time of the sighting, the damage to the boat, and the injury to his son. He then delivered a chilling, soft-spoken warning. He told Dahl, "I know you must be impressed by what you have seen. What I have said is proof to you that I know a great deal more about this experience of yours than you will want to believe." And then came the veiled threat that would become a hallmark of the MIBs. He advised Dahl that it would be best for him and his family if he simply forgot everything he had seen. He wanted Dahl to treat the entire event as if it had never happened. Terrified, Dahl reported the incident to his supervisor, Fred Chrisman. Chrisman initially dismissed the story, but upon visiting Maury Island himself, he discovered more of the strange debris. The 2 men decided to report their story to Ray Palmer, the editor of the popular magazine Amazing Stories. Palmer hired Kenneth Arnold, the very pilot whose own sighting of flying saucers over Mount Rainier just 3 days after Dahl's incident would officially kick off the modern UFO era, to investigate. Arnold flew to Washington, met with Dahl and Chrisman, and felt their story was credible. The case became so serious that 2 United States Army Air Force intelligence officers, Captain William Davidson and Lieutenant Frank Brown, were brought in to investigate. They interviewed Dahl and Chrisman and collected samples of the alleged UFO debris. But on their flight back to their base in California, tragedy struck. The B-25 bomber they were flying inexplicably caught fire and crashed, killing both men. The official cause was engine failure, but for UFO researchers, the timing was too perfect. The only physical evidence and the 2 military officers investigating the case were gone. Shortly after the crash, both Harold Dahl and Fred Chrisman publicly recanted their entire story, claiming it was a hoax. But believers are convinced this recantation was not voluntary. It was the result of a terrifyingly effective warning from the very first man in black. If the Maury Island case was the birth of the MIB phenomenon, then our next account is where the legend was officially christened. This is the story of the man who gave the men in black their name and, in doing so, cemented their place as the sinister boogeyman of UFO lore. His name was Albert K. Bender, a factory worker from Bridgeport, Connecticut. By night, however, Bender was one of the most important figures in early ufology. In 1952, he founded the International Flying Saucer Bureau, or the IFSB, one of the very first global, civilian UFO research organizations. He also published a small but influential journal called Space Review, connecting thousands of researchers and enthusiasts around the world. Bender was not a casual hobbyist. He was a serious, dedicated investigator. In 1953, after a year of intense research and corresponding with his global network, Bender claimed he had made a breakthrough. He believed he had finally discovered the truth behind the UFO phenomenon, what they were, where they came from, and why they were here. He was so confident that he wrote an article for the upcoming October issue of Space Review teasing his monumental discovery. He wrote, "We have the solution to the UFO mystery. We advise those engaged in saucer work to please be very cautious." It was a tantalizing and ominous message. But the article would never be published. The discovery would never be revealed. Because before the issue went to press, Bender received a visit. According to Bender's own account, he was visited by 3 men dressed in dark black suits. They did not knock on his door. He simply became aware of their presence in his room, as if they had materialized out of thin air. They were tall, imposing figures, and their eyes seemed to glow with a strange, internal luminescence. They did not speak aloud, but communicated with him telepathically, their voices echoing directly inside his mind. The men confirmed that he had, in fact, discovered the truth. They complimented him on his ingenuity, and then they gave him a terrifying ultimatum. They ordered him to immediately cease all of his research, shut down the IFSB, and stop publishing Space Review. They warned him that if he ever revealed what he knew to anyone, he would face dire consequences, including imprisonment. To prove their power, they relayed information about his research that no one else could have possibly known. The psychological effect on Albert Bender was profound. And more importantly, it was documented. He was, by all accounts, genuinely and deeply terrified. He immediately followed their instructions to the letter. He abruptly halted publication of Space Review, leaving his subscribers stunned. He dissolved the International Flying Saucer Bureau, sending out a final, cryptic bulletin that read, "The mystery of the flying saucers is no longer a mystery. The source is already known. We are sorry, but due to the nature of the information, we have been advised in the negative." He then burned all of his research, correspondence, and materials. For years, he refused to speak about UFOs, shunning his former colleagues and living in a state of apparent fear. While skeptics might dismiss his later, more fantastical writings, they cannot dismiss his actions in 1953. The very real and sudden shutdown of his entire life's passion is perhaps the most believable evidence of all, that Albert Bender was well and truly silenced. Our next account connects the Men in Black phenomenon to one of the most iconic and baffling photographs in the history of the paranormal. The photo itself is a mystery, but the story of what happened to the photographer after it was taken is a classic MIB encounter, filled with high strangeness and subtle intimidation. The story begins on May 23, 1964. A man named Jim Templeton, a firefighter from Carlisle in northern England, took his wife and 5-year-old daughter on a day trip to a local beauty spot called Berg Marsh, which overlooks the Solway Firth. Templeton was a keen amateur photographer and had brought his camera along to capture some family memories. He placed his daughter on a patch of grass, had her pose with some flowers, and took 3 photographs of her. At the time, he and his wife were certain that they were the only 2 people on the vast, empty marsh. When Templeton went to have the film developed, the chemist pointed out that one of the photos had been spoiled. When Templeton looked, he was stunned. There, in the middle photograph of the sequence, standing on the grass, directly behind his daughter's head, was a figure. It appeared to be a tall individual wearing a bulky, white, all-in-one garment, much like the spacesuits worn by the astronauts of the era. The figure's helmet was dark and opaque, and its posture was stiff and unnatural. Jim Templeton was adamant that no one else had been there when he took the picture. The photo was sent to the police, who found nothing suspicious. It was then picked up by newspapers and became a global sensation. Even the experts at Kodak examined the negative and certified that it had not been tampered with or manipulated in any way. The Solway Firth spaceman, as it was nicknamed, was a genuine anomaly. It was after the photograph became famous that the story takes a sinister turn. Templeton claimed that he was visited by two men who said they were from an unspecified government ministry. They refused to show him any identification and referred to each other only by numbers, number 9 and number 10. They were dressed in dark suits and drove a black Jaguar, a car far too luxurious for typical civil servants. They insisted on taking Templeton back to the exact spot on the marsh where he had taken the photograph. Once there, their behaviour became deeply strange. They did not ask him what he thought the figure was. Instead, they became aggressive and accusatory, demanding to know what he had seen. They asked bizarre, irrelevant questions about the weather conditions and the behaviour of the local animals on that day. When Templeton stood by his story, insisting that no one else had been present, the two men became visibly angry. They tried to force him to admit that he had simply photographed a normal person walking in the distance. When he refused, they abruptly ended the interrogation, got back in their car and drove away, leaving him stranded on the marsh to walk the several miles back home on his own. The encounter was not an investigation, it was an intimidation. Jim Templeton was a credible witness with a respectable job who never sought fame or fortune from the photo. He stuck to his story for his entire life. The bizarre behaviour of the two government men, their use of numbers instead of names, and their hostile, illogical line of questioning all point to a classic and deeply believable Men in Black encounter. Many of the most compelling Men in Black accounts are not just about silencing a witness. They are about retrieving evidence. They are stories of strange men appearing from nowhere with one specific goal: to take back something that was left behind. Our next case, from 1967, is a textbook example of this kind of MIB-I encounter, featuring supernatural knowledge and a chillingly direct threat. It began on the night of October 21st in Toledo, Ohio. A man named Robert Richardson was driving down a quiet street when his night was interrupted by a truly bizarre event. A strange object, which he described as a glob of light, suddenly swooped down from the sky, flew directly into the path of his vehicle, and he struck it. The impact was solid, but the object itself vanished immediately after being hit. Shaken, Richardson stopped his car to inspect the damage. On the road, right where the impact had occurred, he found a small piece of metal. It was about the size of a dime, greyish in colour, and had a strange, almost porous texture like solidified foam. He picked it up and discovered it had unusual physical properties. He could bend it, but it would slowly return to its original shape. Believing he had found a genuine piece of a UUO foam, Richardson took the fragment home. A few days later, he decided to turn it over to a respected civilian research group, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organisation, or APRO, so that it could be scientifically analysed. Just 2 days after he had mailed the fragment to APRO, Richardson received a visit. Two men appeared at his door. They were dressed in immaculate black suits, crisp white shirts and black ties. They drove a late-model black Cadillac. Richardson noted that they moved with a strange stiffness and had an unusually dark, tanned complexion that seemed unnatural. The men did not introduce themselves or state where they were from. They got straight to the point. They told Richardson that they knew he had found a piece of metal and they wanted it. Richardson, completely stunned, told them the truth. He no longer had it, as he had sent it away for analysis. This is where the encounter becomes truly terrifying. One of the men responded without hesitation, "We know you gave it to them. We want you to get it back." The fact that they knew about a private transaction that had happened just 48 hours prior was impossible. But what they said next moved the encounter from strange to sinister. The men looked at Richardson and delivered a cold, direct, and unforgettable threat. He told him, "If you want your wife to stay as pretty as she is, you'd better get it back for us." The threat was unambiguous and deeply personal. A terrified Richardson immediately contacted the research organization and begged them to return the fragment. The entire incident, including the specific threat against his wife, was documented at the time by APRE in their journal. The combination of the MIB's inexplicable, almost omniscient knowledge and their willingness to make such a cruel and personal threat makes Robert Richardson's story one of the most chilling and believable MIB encounters on record. We conclude with what many researchers consider to be the single most bizarre, detailed, and compelling Men in Black account of all time. It is a case that is so saturated with high strangeness that it almost defies belief, yet it comes from a witness of unimpeachable credibility. This is the story of Dr. Herbert Hopkins. In 1976, Dr. Hopkins was a respected 58-year-old family physician in Maine. In his spare time, he was also a hypnosis consultant for a UFO investigation involving a man who claimed to have been abducted. He was a man of science, not prone to flights of fancy. On the evening of September 11, 1976, he was home alone, his wife and children having gone out. The phone rang. The man on the other end of the line identified himself as the vice president of the New Jersey UFO Research Organization. He spoke in a slow, deliberate voice and asked Dr. Hopkins if he could speak with him about the abduction case he was consulting on. Hopkins agreed. The man then asked if he could visit him to discuss it in person. Hopkins, still on the phone, looked around his messy study and said sure he could come over. The man on the phone said, "I am on my way right now." The moment Hopkins hung up the phone, he heard footsteps on his porch steps. There was no possible way for anyone to have traveled from New Jersey or even from across town in the single second it took to place the receiver back in its cradle. The visitor had arrived impossibly fast. Dr. Hopkins opened the door and was confronted by a truly surreal sight. The man was dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, a crisp white shirt, a black tie, and a black fedora hat. The suit looked brand new, without a single wrinkle, speck of lint or dust. But it was the man's physical appearance that was so shocking. He was completely unnaturally bald, with no eyebrows or eyelashes. His skin was a dead, waxy white, like a mannequin's. His face was completely blank and expressionless. And, most bizarrely, he was wearing bright red lipstick on a mouth that was just a thin, straight, lipless slit. He moved into the house with a strange, gliding motion. The visitor spoke in a flat, robotic monotone, never changing his pitch or inflection. He discussed the UFO case with Hopkins, demonstrating intimate knowledge of it. Then the encounter took a turn into the truly paranormal. The visitor gestured to a penny on a table and asked Hopkins to place it in the palm of his hand and watch it closely. As Dr. Hopkins stared at the coin, it began to change. It first turned a silvery color, then it became blurry and bluish, and then, over the course of a few seconds, it faded away into nothingness. It had completely dematerialized from his hand. The visitor then said in his toneless voice, "Neither you nor anyone else on this planet will ever see that coin again." He then calmly advised Dr. Hopkins to destroy all of the research he had gathered on the UFO case. Every tape recording, every document. The message, delivered after a casual display of impossible power, was clear. Terrified, Hopkins agreed. The visitor then stood up, walked out, and vanished into the night. Deeply shaken, Dr. Hopkins went to his basement and erased every single one of his research tapes. The sheer strangeness of the account, combined with the credibility of the witness, makes the impossible visit to Dr. Herbert Hopkins the ultimate Men in Black encounter. And that is it. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the Purple Files, click the like button, and drop a comment down below. More videos to come, and until then, thanks for watching.